Universal pre-K, Head Start, whatever you want to call it, has been a contentious issue for a long time. Basically, it's government-funded education for 3 and 4-year-olds, right? So we send them, 3 and 4. And then at 5, we send them off to kindergarten, and then, they get into the meat grinder of K through 12. And right, we're all libertarians here. We don't want more government schools. All right, maybe we do, maybe we don't. We talk a little bit about that towards the end of this as I share some of my experiences with our 6-year-old who's going through public schooling and some of my thoughts. All right, but enough about that. I read this article in the Detroit News. Michigan's pre-K promise can do more to reach families with Susanna Barnes Pettit. And she is a social mobility fellow with Young Voices and a policy manager in the Washington, D.C. area. She's a Michigan native. And that Gretchen Whitmer was up to more nonsense. She created a Head Start program for Michigan. And guess what? Nobody's using it. So we talk about why. What is it? What is Head Start generally? What is pre-K? Why are people in Michigan choosing to stay at community-based organizations like the one I went to at the Methodist Church when I was a kid? And how should we fund pre-K if we're going to fund pre-K? So we talk a little bit about that. And really, at the end of the day, it's about you parents, okay? We can rant against government schools. There's a lot of great principals, a lot of great public school teachers. There's a lot of great people trying to do their best work at these public school systems. I'm not one of these people trying to ransack the school board. Really, at the end of the day, it's the parents. So we talk a little bit about that too. So stay tuned here on the Chris Spangle Show. Susanna, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
It is great to talk to someone from the People's Republic of Michigan.
Yes.
I was sharing with you, I live in Indiana, so you're Indiana's hat is what we call you here. And look, Indiana's better, but you're still better than Ohio. So yes. You've got that going for you, and you're definitely not Illinois.
I'm glad we can join forces against Ohio. As a staunch University of Michigan fan, happy to rag on Ohio anytime I can.
See, it's awkward here because we have IU versus Purdue. And so you have these business relationships where they went to Purdue, and I'm an IU fan. I went to a version of IU. And it's like, it gets tense. So at least you get to hate somebody in another state. That must feel
exactly.
good.
It does. It does.
Yeah, we were talking about COVID beforehand and just how has Michigan and Gretchen Whitmer, let me just ask you this completely non-relevant question to what we're going to discuss today because I'm curious. Because as someone close to your state, I watched Gretchen Whitmer make crazy decisions during COVID, like we're not going to sell you seeds and just all these weird things. And the guy who ran on her platform here in Indiana did so poorly. He did 20 points less than Joe Biden in Indiana and almost lost to the Libertarian. Legitimately, Don Rainwater, look up those election results. It was fantastic. But she has somehow, despite that humiliation, become someone who is perennially in the discussion for presidential material. Why? What? I mean, explain this to me. Has there been something that happened in Michigan that has covered her tracks on that?
I think Gretchen Whitmer is really good at giving big promises that people really like to hear. And trust me, as someone who learned how to drive in Michigan, hearing that she would fix the roads was very appealing. But that hasn't happened since she took office. And I think that's just a microcosm of kind of all of her policies, that they sound really great, that they sound ambitious and innovative, but then she can't secure the necessary political capital or can't actually find the best ways of achieving the goals she says that she wants to put forth. And so I think that there's something appealing about having someone who has such big ideas running for president, but there's just not the track record to support her ideas.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes sense. So she's full of crap. That's what I heard. So let's talk about pre-K because this is one of those ideas that was enacted in Michigan. And so we're going to talk about Michigan second because we reach a national audience here. But let's talk about pre-K, preschool. All right. I have we have a 6-year-old in kindergarten right now. We did not send her to preschool because we just felt it was better for her to be home with both of her parents. I worked from home at the time with her mom, who's a stay-at-home mom all day. Preschool is like half the day. And there has been a movement for a very long time to make pre-K a government run, funded system, right? Especially as childcare becomes more expensive. It's sort of just a way to offer free babysitting, in my opinion. But what is pre-K as outlined in Michigan, and when they set this program up for pre-K in Michigan, what does that mean? What does that look like?
Yeah. So in Michigan, the universal, or the goal of universal pre-K is designed for 4-year-olds in the state to enhance their literary and math skills. So for 4-year-olds, the idea of promoting literary and math skills seems kind of like an ambitious goal, but it basically is like making sure they know their ABCs, making sure they can identify colors, making sure that there's some sort of numerical logic, basic counting, identifying of age, kind of those developmental benchmarks that are useful before kindergarten. So, like you said, a lot of parents choose to keep their kids at home. There is data that shows that parents who are educated, their children don't get as much benefit from going, as much of the kind of academic, if you will, benefit from going to preschool as opposed to social benefit. Uh, but most people who choose to keep their kids at home, they don't see as big of a difference, although low income families are the ones who generally benefit the most from attending preschool to help achieve kind of those developmental benchmarks that maybe, as you said, like your wife stays at home, you work from home. If both parents are working, families might not be able to access those. So that's kind of the purported benefit of having universal pre-K, is that students are entering kindergarten at the same level, and then this kind of trickles up to helping the teachers where they aren't doing as much remedial work, making sure that children who maybe don't know red from blue are now able to identify that. They can instead focus on, oh, let's talk about the order of the rainbow or different colors and how colors mix. And so it's kind of a catching up game to make sure that everyone's on an equal playing field when they enter kindergarten.
Got it. So I don't know if you went to preschool. I did. I went to the Methodist church for preschool, like probably most of Indiana. Is that what it looks like up there in Michigan? Who's doing the bulk of pre-K work right now?
So it varies. I also went to parochial preschool. I went to a Lutheran preschool up in Michigan. And so I'm very similar. I went to preschool uh, at 3 and 4. About 60% of 3 and 4-year-olds in Michigan are enrolled in pre K, which is about the average for most states. Um, and that is a mix. So some students are enrolled in these state-run programs, which is generally called the Great Start Readiness Program or Head Start. Those are the two large programs. Head Start is national. The Great Start Readiness Program in Michigan is the state kind of expansion of Head Start. But then also programs are in, or children are in programs that are more community based. Michigan has a lot of nature preschools.
Mm.
I think it's just because of the amount of lakes and kind of natural beauty that Michigan has, that parents want their kids to learn to appreciate that. And then, of course, parochial or Montessori are two other popular kind of alternative preschools that maybe parents prefer for their children.
Yeah, here in Indiana, we tried the corn preschool, and that just wasn't that as interesting as going to Lake Michigan or hiking in around Grand Rapids.
Yeah, it's a tough.
Yeah, so when they implemented this, all right, so let's just talk about what a CBO is, okay? And that's sort of what you just outlined, but
Right.
it's central to your article that you wrote in the Detroit News titled "Michigan's Pre-K Promise Can Do More to Reach Families," which you can read in the show notes. But why is there such a wide variation in CBO participation across the different regions of Michigan? It seemed like there was some regions are more apt to do preschool than others.
Yeah, so CBOs are those Montessori religious kind of alternative preschool programs. It stands for community based organizations. And these are typically private schools. So right now, 30% of Michigan's Great Start Readiness Program, or GSRP programs, are dedicated to CBOs. So 30% of the seats that are given to low and middle income students are going to these community based programs. However, these programs face kind of unique restraints. They don't know how many seats they're going to get. And so, since they are privately run, it's hard to have the incentive to allocate a seat to a student who might not be able to pay tuition if you don't know that the government will be footing their bill. So these CBO programs are more likely to say yes to a higher income student whose parents have the money to pay for them than a lower income student who maybe is interested in the program but is relying on the allocation of federal funds. It's also that since they don't, or state funds, excuse me, it's also that since these schools don't know if they're going to get money, they can't expand. So
Right.
they maybe aren't recruiting a teacher who just graduated from a local university with an early childhood education degree because they don't know if they're going to have enough students or enough funding to pay for that person. So there's kind of this timeline mismatch where if you don't find out until middle of August that you have seats available, you may have already missed the deadline. And this is especially important for low income families who need more time to plan and more time to kind of get prepared for preschool. As I said, if both parents are working, they might want to have that certainty that they will have a place as because it serves as a form of childcare for a lot of low income families.
Right.
So high income families are able to attend these more unique and I would say, as someone who wishes I had gone to nature preschool, it seems really fun. And I think a lot of kids would love that, but it's hard to prevent it from being kind of a luxury good where it only goes to high income families and it's closed out from the low income. And if you look at the data in Michigan, a lot of those programs are in higher income towns as opposed to lower income towns.
Got it. So just so I'm clear, because I think when acronyms start flying around, it's like talking to a member of the military. They're like, "Yeah, I
Yeah.
went over to the AOC and had my DW4," and you're like, "What are you talking about?" Okay, so a CBO is that community-based organization. The GSRP is like the Head Start of Michigan. It's a state-funded program. And is there a third category? Does everybody kind of fall into we're funded by the government, we're funded by private money when it comes to Michigan's pre-K system?
Yep, that's largely it. There are a few Head Start programs, which are the federal, but the majority of seats that are allocated from government funds are these GSRP or Great Start Readiness Program
And
seats.
what's the percentage breakdown again between the two choices there?
I'm actually not sure about
Okay.
the difference between Great Start Readiness Program and Head Start, but GSRP is what Gretchen Whitmer has been trying to expand because that's what's in her purview of what she can allocate more money towards. So my assumption would be that the vast majority are GSRP seats.
Okay, so you would think that when the government starts funding something and makes it quote unquote free, then that expands the amount of people that are going to use that service. But what you found there in Michigan is that there are a lot of open seats in the GSRP category.
Mm.
And so why do you think that is? Tell us kind of the magnitude of the open seats, like what, and would you qualify the program largely as a failure at this point based on headcount?
Yeah, so in 2024, Gretchen Whitmer expanded the program to include 20,000 more seats, and only 6,000 more children signed up. So that is a gap of about 14,000 open seats across the country. That or across, oh my gosh, I keep saying federal terms, and I mean state, across
That's
the
okay.
state.
You should hear me when I talk about Kevin McCarthy. I call him Mike McCarthy, like the head
Oh,
coach for. I do it all the time. Listeners are used to it.
yeah. But that's a huge gap of 14,000 kids who are for some reason not getting put into these programs. And it's not that students are going to preschool. As I mentioned, 61% of students of the age group are in preschool. And it's not that these programs aren't good quality. Michigan has actually one of the best universal pre-K programs. My view is that the problem is access to programs that match parents' needs. So we maybe have the supply, but we don't have the demand.
Mm.
Not everyone can afford, parochial school from K through 12, but parents might value sending their children to religious based education for preschool, or they might value the Montessori style of parenting and want to send their children there. And so parents who are looking at preschool programs and maybe have a little bit more income elasticity and are able to kind of absorb that cost might be choosing to say, you know what, even though it's free, I don't want to send my kid to one of those public programs. I would prefer to send my child somewhere that matches what we value. And so I kind of propose that if we want to achieve this goal of universality, which is 75% of Michigan's 4-year-olds enrolled in a public preschool program, that we need to have more seats in these community-based programs. If the goal is increasing universality, that's one way of doing it, but you can also kind of give the power back to the parents and do this through education vouchers or education savings accounts for preschool, which I don't think would fly politically in Michigan, but it does put the power to the parents, which has a lot of value, since this seems to be, the parents aren't interested in the programs that currently exist.
Yeah, I would fall into that category. I mean, we just have no interest in preschool, right? Like, you really only get, like, I saw this Jordan Peterson thing, and I'm not like a big Jordan Peterson watcher, but it's like, you only get 4 years with your kids. And it hit me kind of hard. I was like, wow, we really only do get like 4 years before they go to kindergarten. And then they're kind of, our daughter's dealing with all these social complexities, right? Like, I don't know. It's we just haven't found a lot of value in preschool. I wouldn't say we're in the higher income, but like compared to some of the people that you talked about in your article, we definitely qualify in that CBO crowd, right? But is it also that there's a greater there's more choice with preschool because it's still it's not kind of monopolized by government money in the way that K through 12 education is. So is it just that there's a lot more choice that people aren't choosing to go in the GSRPs?
I think so. I think that, like you said, people have these precious few years with their children, and the idea of sending them to school might be it's just not something they're comfortable with. You see a lot of parents using home-based care, which is like a neighbor maybe who does a few hours of preschool a day, and it feels a little bit more value aligned. And so I do think there's just kind of this saturation of choices, which is a good thing. Like, educational choice and access to what parents want matters, but that educational choice hasn't translated to these public programs, and unfortunately hasn't translated down to the lower classes.
So in terms of like the quality of education between like a CBO and a GSRP, right? CBO being the community-based organization, GSRP being the Head Start version, the government-funded program, is there an educational quality difference? Is it the CBO just leans more into religion? And, honestly, like, it's preschool, right? So, like, what kind of educational difference could there really be? Just keep them alive.
Yeah, exactly.
But, is the choice of the empty seats just, it's not as good, so I'm going to go to these private options? Or is it really pretty decent, all things considering, and it's just people aren't interested in preschool generally?
I think there's a perception that these programs are worse. The National Institute for Early Education Research, which kind of does like the accreditation for preschools, all of Michigan's public programs hit their 10 quality benchmarks for preschool. It's the only state that has universal preschool that does that. So these programs are high quality. I just think there's a perception that it's a public program, it can't be good, or that people, like I said, have this view of, oh, I want my child to have a unique preschool experience that teaches them the value of nature. And so it's kind of like comparing apples to oranges. Like, these public preschool programs might be really good at those basic literary and math skills, but not as good as a Montessori program in developing independence, or as good in a nature-based program in developing a love for the outdoors. So that's why parental choice is so important, because like my husband and I were talking about it. We would love to send our kids to a home-based preschool, or there's one at our church that we think would be great to send our eventual children to, but not, that's very unique compared to a public school. They just aren't comparable. And for a lot of parents, I think it's just, I don't have an interest in sending my child to public schools, even if they are good for these first few years.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm a libertarian. I don't know about you. I'm not going to make you claim, but one of the arguments for a long time against Head Start is that once you introduce the Leviathan, then it takes over. And so we need to be on that preschool wall and making sure that the money doesn't come in here. And so what are some alternative funding mechanisms that, all right, so maybe this is a time where GSRP is available, but it's not really working, that free marketeers can come in and say, let's, I know the Mackinac Center had some various plans that you mentioned, but what are some better funding ways than just we're going to block grant money?
Yeah, so some of this is decoupling money from school districts. So you still have that money allocated, but instead of it going directly to these intermediate school districts, which are kind of for like geographical regions in Michigan, they go to each parent's student. So they, or each parent of a student. So they can say, I'm going to take my money and go to a religious based preschool, or I'm going to take my money and I'm going to go to a public school. And so that's one way of doing it. I also just like, I'm also a libertarian. I'm a very community based libertarian. I think
Yeah.
a lot of how we solve social problems is by increasing community. And I think churches have a really important role to play in creating these networks where people can co-teach their kids at the preschool level or even higher, and kind of step outside the realm of government, or even just in neighborhoods. I'm live in outside of DC, and we have a next door group where people talk about like, hey, if anyone wants to come over and play in our yard, I'm going to be around for the afternoon and I'm happy to watch some kids while you get stuff done around the house. Those sorts of things can be scaled. You just need to have the community networks to do so. And I think that's an important part of being a pro liberty person, is also being pro community and trying to find ways that you can exist outside the government. And so that's probably an unsatisfactory answer for people who want the government involvement. But I think that's where these kind of education vouchers or specific saving accounts dedicated towards preschool can be useful, but also just get involved in your community and see what happens.
Yeah. So so we have a 6-year-old. It's my stepdaughter. She goes to public school, which is why she goes to public school, because both parents just, that was the negotiation. And then, we have a 2-year-old, almost 2-year-old, and one on the way. And our plan right now is to homeschool the 2-year-old, even though there's going to be some probably friction between a public school and a homeschool set of siblings. It just is what it is, right? But it has been interesting to have a kid in a public school. It is not a great public school. They're trying, right? Like, this is the thing, is I think once you have experiences in life, your libertarianism maybe, I don't know, erodes or changes or becomes more thoughtful, is the way that I like to think about my show these days. But you see a struggling school that is getting its funding stripped for music, art, gym. Now they're going to have to share those teachers between 7 other public schools in the inner city public school that she goes to. She tested into one of the top 10 schools for elementary next year, so she'll be in a different, better educational setting, which is great for our kid. But it also is really tough for the kids that aren't going to have that same system. But one thing that I've found is, at this school, we are involved parents. Her dad is involved. My wife is very involved. There's like a quarter of the class that is very involved, and then there's 3/4 that just don't care about their kids' education, which I think is really sad, which is sort of what shades it. And so I wonder how much of the seats not getting filled is just people not even caring. And that also scares me for like the voucher system, because, man, I don't want more erosion in these schools, and then you have like this segregated school system. But also, like, give us the money because we care and want to put our kid in the best educational system. And if other parents don't have that same desire, then that's sadly their choice. So I don't know. You tell me that I'm an unlibertarian, uncaring, unfeeling person, or maybe too libertarian. I don't know. I'm just trying to. I've been working this out in my mind, which is one reason I wanted to talk to you, because I'd love to hear your perspective as someone who's thinking about this actively.
I mean, I totally empathize with you. I call myself a bleeding heart classical liberal, because I also think about those things of like, what about the kids whose parents don't care? Because you're right. So many parents are just apathetic about their kids' education. And I love what you said about like music and art, that those are what's getting cut, when those are what are, for me, it was my lifeline in school. I was good at school. I was good at math, science, all of that. But what brought me joy was art and music. And I ended up being an economist. That wasn't my career, but
Right.
it is something that like got me through school. It was the joy of my day, was going to, uh, you know, be in the theater club and going to dance class, and those things are really valuable, and I think depriving of children of that, we know is bad for their development as well, and so I think it's sad that that's what we cut and what we devalue. Um, and I wish I had a better solution about parents who just don't care, but I do think that is a problem, and I know Michigan recognizes that, and they're trying to do better outreach to these families. But if you have, especially for the low income families who have so many conflicting priorities, it sometimes gets pushed to the back burner, and it's a privilege to care deeply, and not everyone has that ability, but also some people just opt out of it. And I think there's, you know, a lot to that's one of the challenges of these like child welfare policies is there's always going to be parents that just don't want to be parents and be involved and go to those meetings. And I wish I had a more satisfying, silver bullet solution.
This is the Friedman Foundation.
Mhm.
Milton Friedman's foundation is actually here in Indianapolis for
Oh, okay.
reasons that the guy who was going to run it wanted it to be here. And so it's here. We have the Lumina Foundation, which Sally Mae transitioned into a nonprofit. So it's like one of the largest nonprofits in the world. It's based here at the Mind Trust, Match.
Mhm.
We've got all this amazing, like Indianapolis, the Democrats in Indianapolis sponsored charter schools back in the 2000s. So it's an innovation hub. And I will tell you, as somebody who has lived in this environment and been a part of the discussion and has friends who are public school principals, who are working at charter schools, who are public school teachers, who are homeschoolers, like everybody wishes they had a solution for that. Like everybody wishes that they could just impress upon the parents the importance of helping their kids read. And the end result, and I'll leave my end on this. I had lunch with somebody recently who has a lot of jobs to offer and wants to offer lower income kids out of IPS jobs, and he cannot do it because they cannot read. Like the demand is there, but the supply of literate students is not there coming out of our local school system. And we can sit and talk about how it's the school's fault and the government's fault and all this and that, but man, it's not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing it's personal responsibility in giving a crap about your kids.
Yeah, I mean, there's a really harrowing study about the number of words young children hear at different levels of parental involvement. And that comes from parents reading to kids or even just talking. There, you see that there's a lot of benefit from even when a baby is really little, just constantly talking to them to improve their literacy and improve their own communication skills. And if you don't have a parent who's willing to take the 10 minutes before bed to read you 2 books, it really sets children back. And so that's kind of my general advice for parents is just make sure you're reading to your kids or reading everything when you're out, saying, okay, we're grocery shopping. This is what this label says, just to get those neurons firing. A lot of people don't realize how little kids read until it's too late. And then they're graduating high school at a low literacy rate. And then it sets them up for, long-term struggles where they can't get a job, they can't keep a job. Literacy is a huge problem in the US, and a lot of people, I think, see literacy at a passing level and think that that's okay, but literacy at a 3rd grade level is not enough for long-term success. So read to your kids for sure.
Yeah, I need to be better about it. Sometimes, I'm going to be honest with you, sometimes by 7 o'clock, we've lost the war and they just have to go to bed.
Listen, I'm saying this as someone who doesn't have kids yet. So it's, I don't know what it actually is like, but
honestly, reading at bedtime is like the best way that my stepdaughter and I bond. Like it is the time we put the little one to bed and he gets his little books read and then he steals it and then he tries to read it. And it's like, all right, you've had your benefit, go to bed. And then we have reading time and Bible reading time. And it's usually just her and I, and it's just this great time to have a conversation. Usually we will read a little bit, but then it becomes just great connection time a lot of times. And I have noticed that we have not been doing that the last couple months, and she and I are having more tension in a relationship, and it always stems down to her just feeling like she's not getting enough attention, right? But that's every 6-year-old kind of. It's just, as someone who does have kids, it is such a great way to benefit them in so many ways, and it's so easy, and there's like so much access to books. But all right, Susanna, you've been such a fun person to talk to. What would be your advice for Michigan parents and Michigan lawmakers based on your research?
Yeah, I mean, I think for lawmakers, don't underestimate these community-based schools and don't underestimate what they can do for the populations the Great Start Readiness Program was designed for. These programs can do a lot for low-income kids, and lawmakers should do more to make sure that low-income kids are being able to go to these programs. For parents, I think it's just choose wisely. If you have the privilege to send your kids to a community-based program, I highly recommend it. I loved, as I said, like I love the idea of nature-based preschool. There's maybe one or two in the DC area, and I can't imagine that they'd be as good as the one at my hometown nature center near a river that leads into a lake. That's just hard for me to imagine, but take advantage of it. I think there's a lot that you can teach kids with just how much Michigan has to offer. I don't think I realized how wonderful Michigan is until I left it. And so give your children the appreciation of Michigan if you can.
Yeah, going to Maryland and DC, that'll do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I miss the Midwest where people are normal.
Midwest is best.
Don't smell like cologne and slicked back hair. All right. Where can we follow if you want to follow you on this and other subjects?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Susanna Pettit. And then I also have a Substack called The Upward Bound, where I write about fertility, social mobility, and then other issues like early childhood education, those sorts of topics. So would love to see you all there.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining me here on the show. We really appreciate it. If you liked this show, you learned something, then please share it on social media, share it with a friend, send them a text with the Spotify link. That's the best way to help any podcasts that get discovered now. So we thank you, and we appreciate you listening here on The Chris Spangle Show. All right, Susanna, thanks so much.
Thank you. That was so much fun.
Yeah, it was great to have you, and let me just stop.